Hey everyone, I just want to let you all know that over the last couple episodes, we've had some issues with connectivity. Poor Jim's internet's not been the best. He's been working with his ISP, so we want to apologize for any audio issues that you might hear. We're trying to do the best we can to edit it to limit some of the audio issues that we're having on our end here, but we really appreciate your support, and we want to thank you for listening.
Jim, you need to get the chicken and sacrifice it under a full moon, like we talked about. Okay, bud?
Yeah.
Welcome to the OtherWorldsGG Community Cast. This is episode number 13. 13 episodes in. Welcome
Lucky
also my
13.
Lucky number 13. Welcome also my co-host, that's Mellified, and we also have Alien Pickle. What's up?
I'm doing good. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. I'm great. It's not technically night. I mean, it's the beginning of the afternoon, but I mean, I'm doing well.
I'm better than my internet.
That's yeah. So there's been a disclaimer that was put at the beginning of this episode before we started. Man, Jim, that really is a pain. But you know what's really going to be a pain is this is our last episode for a couple of weeks. We're going to take a little bit of a break. I'm in the process of going through a move across the country, and so I'm
halfway.
Yeah,
Don't exaggerate.
You know, going to the moon. You know, what was the meme? Daddy Musk is going to take us to Mars.
That's right.
But yeah, no, I'm moving a few states away for where I'm currently at, be closer to the in-laws, and in that process, I'm going to be without internet for probably about 8 weeks, so a couple months. But I've got some friends that've got internet up there, so we'll be able to do the show at some point. But we are going to take about a month hiatus, so this will be the last episode for a few weeks. But we still really appreciate your all support. So in one of our previous episodes, a couple episodes ago, we talked about persistent worlds, and we specifically kind of went down the path on like microtransactions and like eShops and those kinds of things in those persistent worlds. But one of the things that we're doing a kind of a part 2 of that, and one of the things that kind of triggered that this conversation for part 2 was I was perusing Steam the other day and looking at MMOs and what's out there and if there's anything that I haven't heard about. And boy, howdy, wouldn't you know it, something caught my attention that my jaw hit the floor because I thought I'd never see the name of this game in legitimate conversations ever again, which was Shadowbane. Shadowbane of all things was on Steam for was it $10 or $11? And for those of you who don't know, Shadowbane was an MMO in the early 2000s that closed up shop around 2009, and it was later acquired by a Chinese company, I think in 2014, with the aim or the idea of doing a new game with the same name, so like some kind of like modern version of Shadowbane. Well, years went by, nothing ever happened, and then in 2020 they announced that they were going to be putting it back up, and they officially launched it recently. I think within the last month or so. And let me tell you, as someone who played Shadowbane before, on when it was still alive, it's almost as if, and I think Jim made this analogy off air, it's almost as if like someone just turned the power off to the warehouse that the server was in, and then like a decade later just turned it back on again, and here it is. And it's like with some minor adjustments to its own eShop in the game, it's basically the same game. Like what do you guys think about that? Like how wild is that?
It reminds me of Tron Legacy, right? Whenever he walks into the dark, dusty arcade and like
right,
power on.
right, yeah, that's kind of how I felt when I saw it too. I was like, this is bizarre. I mean,
I wonder if it literally is just the hard drives. The servers were sitting in a storage unit somewhere, and somebody pulled them out and dusted them off. It sure sounds like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the where it was when it was last there. I mean, obviously, all the user like accounts, it's all base new. But like I picked it up. So when you buy it and you install the game and you go to launch it, it's using your Steam account and your Steam profile as the user account for the game. So I mean, you launch it and you just you've logged in essentially. You just hit play. And then you can make a character and start playing on their server there. So there's no like create an account somewhere. It's just straight up you're playing, which on one hand is actually kind of cool when you think about it. Like, wow, like what if an MMO used Steam as its backend?
It's interesting for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like it almost kind of gives you hope, right? Because so when you think about MMOs, you've got your classic traditional sense of an MMO, right? And then you've got like your new modern, more like daily login reward style MMO that's kind of like the thing that is today. You still have stuff from the early 2000s that's going today, like EverQuest 1 and 2, right? You still have, and a lot of people have like probably forgotten, but EVE Online came out in 2003. Which is the same year that also Star Wars Galaxies came out, and Galaxies has since up and left us. In 2004 we had World of Warcraft that launched, and more recently they launched their WoW Classic version, which is the vanilla version of the game that you can play, and they're getting ready to launch their Burning Crusade Classic. With the intent of, if you want to still keep just playing the base vanilla version, you can, and they'll just move your character to a vanilla only server, and you can just keep playing there until your heart's content. But if you want to keep moving forward, the starting server that you were on will get upgraded to the Burning Crusade, and you can keep moving forward. Which I think is fascinating that Blizzard is going down this route with this. So not only will you continue to play the most up-to-date expansion of the game, but it seems like they're going back through and doing iterations, and you'll be able to play on iterations, which to me sounds like a lot of overhead.
Yeah. I know how much work was involved the first time around, so it does seem a little crazy.
Oh, right. Yeah. You would know.
I mean, it's just that I remember, Mike Morheim saying when WoW Classic was first proposed that the code didn't exist anymore. And that sounds crazy, but like a lot of the world is stored in a database. And we would just update the database with the new version of stuff as we went. And I don't know that we ever, saved like a magic copy of, oh, this is Burning Crusade at launch, this is this game at launch from the database perspective. So yeah, it's got to be a lot of work to go back and recreate some of that stuff.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Like I on one hand, as a games preservationist kind of person, I am thrilled to hear this, but on the other hand, it's just like at some point, like what's that gonna cost? Because you can play the base version of the game, the current, I should say, iteration of the game up to level 20 for free. Anybody can play it. So that the first hit's free. And so at that point though, but they did, I don't know if that's true anymore, because they did some leveling compression. Which I remember being weird. So when they launched their latest expansion, they compressed all of the levels. So it was going to be like 120 plus or something like that. And they compressed everything back down. So like my 110 character got down to like level 50 or something like that. And so they redid the leveling system, in a very interesting way, when they did the latest expansion. But I'm definitely a fan of the classic MMO style. I know it's a little bit more grindier and challenging, but I think that was kind of the appeal of MMOs for me back in the day. It made, the work you put into it feel more rewarding when you did get the rewards. So I don't know. What's your take on all this, man? Like, do you see potentially other MMOs of days gone by just randomly coming back like that? I mean, I wonder what it would take to acquire something like that. Like,
I suspect, a lot of times these companies went out of business when the when their big MMO failed. And typically what happens is all of that office equipment, all those computers, hard drives, all that storage gets sold off, and probably a lot of it's just gone. It's the data's been deleted, the server doesn't exist anymore. Maybe some programmer somewhere has a copy of the server code, but like I say, the databases and things like that a lot of times don't make it. So I think this is going to be very much the exception rather than the rule for bringing back these old MMOs, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's quite a shame, man. Like, and while I don't condone piracy, I do say that I really think it's quite a thing to see some of these communities that get built around these love for these games that no longer exist. Like City of Heroes, I know Jim made mention of that back in the first Persistent one, where City of Heroes is back. It's just like, man, I really wish I could play it, and now it's back. There's an emulated community that's playing it, but like, are you really playing it? Was it really just the idea of it rather than it itself? As much as I love Star Wars Galaxies, I only really get on the Legends server and play on that emulated server once every couple of months, just because I'm also playing a whole lot of other games. Because when you're a gamer, there's only so much time you have outside of your work life to be able to play all of the things. And then I don't even have a family yet, so I know with you, Mellified, you have a job and a family, so you gotta.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Netflix talked about were they worried about other companies doing streaming services, and they said, we don't consider yeah, sure, they're competition, they're in the same space, but that's not our real competition. Our competition is video games. Our competition is books and all the other things you could be doing with your time instead of watching Netflix. And I feel like to some extent that's where this all falls for me. Is I have X amount of hours of leisure time a week, and I want to spend it doing the thing that I'm most excited about, most passionate about, most interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And old MMOs, I kind of been there, done that. I was big into Dark Age of Camelot back when it was a going concern, and I enjoyed it, but there was nothing about that experience that makes me want to go back in time and recreate it. I'm happy with it being a memory, I guess.
There is an emulator for DAOC.
Oh, is there really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
So some games that were pretty interesting have emulators that are out there, like Raiders with a Z. That got it. It's kind of like if you put Warcraft and Monster Hunter together. And then there was the Warhammer Online, which was interesting.
Yeah, they were working on an emulator for that, but I feel like that project.
Oh, it's up.
Oh, is it full? Is it full now?
Full up.
Interesting. Yep. Yeah, and some of these old games like this are definitely something that I think we are considering for our other worlds exploration. The video game tourism kind of thing. It'd be kind of interesting to go back and look at some of these things to kind of see where stuff has come from, to kind of compare it to where we are today. But it was just such a weird and random thing to all of a sudden pull up, here's Steam Shadowbane, and you're just like, what in the hell? That's just such a weird thing to see. And I mean, they've got emulated communities, but it's so funny to me to see some classic MMOs are still here. They're still around. They're still going and kicking and doing their own thing, and yet for whatever reason, some of these other ones have just fallen off or disappeared or gone away because the company doesn't want to support it. And as you said, Mellified, it's a real shame when information and that kind of stuff gets lost, because I feel like it's a complete destruction of a lot of work and a lot of talent, and for it to go away to only be something that's like a memory for somebody, I mean, that's a real shame.
Yeah, well, and we've lost something, right? Objectively speaking, whether you're emotionally invested in that or not, we've lost a piece of history. We've lost a piece of art that no longer exists because we didn't care enough to preserve it. And I just, that makes me sad. It may sound silly, but it makes me sad.
No, and I think, in our last episode we talked about like StarCraft Ghost as an example, and I feel the same thing with like Star Wars 1313. There was so much about that looked interesting, and for all intents and purposes, for all we know, that's kind of gone. I think in more recent terms of like some kind of like a preservation thing that I think was awesome is the more publicly acknowledged fact of the GoldenEye HD remake that they were making for Xbox Live that never came out because of licensing issues, but yet thanks to the power of the internet and people, archiving certain things, that is actually a reality that we can experience. It's not 100% like remastered because it never got fully finished, but I'd say it's about 90% there. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have all the skyboxes, but it does have all the HD stuff kind of like there. And so it's,
well, it'd be like last episode we were talking about StarCraft Ghost, right? It's like, well, what if that just popped out?
Right. No, exactly.
It's it's 99% done. It was declared done. And they didn't like it enough to ship it, but by God, there's a done-ass game for those people.
And according to Mellified, it's out in the world somewhere. So if someone's clever enough to find it, DM me and let me know.
Yeah, and honestly, it would settle the question. Like, if people play it and they're like, "Wow, this sucks," right? Then Blizzard's got a point of justification.
Never came out. Right? Yeah, exactly.
Blizzard can say, and that's why.
Yeah. I'm definitely curious to know. I am knowing what I know now. I would really like to see that. I know it's not necessarily a persistent worlds kind of thing, but I mean, it just kind of goes to that same sentiment of, there's something lost here when you look at those kinds of things. I'm also fascinated too about some of these persistent worlds that just like no one ever really talks about. Like games that are just there that kind of like get mentioned, but then no one ever really talks about. So I'm thinking about like, when the early days of Second Life, for example. I remember Second Life getting featured in Hot Tub Time Machine, I believe it was. Wasn't it Hot Tub Time Machine or whatever, where the kid was playing Second Life and his character was like in prison and he's like, I gotta get swole. And the guy's like, man, stop playing games or whatever. I forget what movie that was, but
well, it got a lot of play in stuff like Business Week, and God, there was like a Wall Street Journal article, and it was all about like property speculation for virtual spaces, right? Which we were talking earlier about, like you being next to a particular person who's a land baron in a certain game, and it's just like, hey, I'm sitting on this potential money, like someday he's going to want my land.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, but it's weird that exists, that is an ecosystem and a market that exists. I know it was kind of a thing in like Ultima Online, but some of these persistent worlds actually had that. Like Star Wars Galaxies kind of had that, right? Like where if you had a town that was like a very good town, land became valuable based on the value of that city and what it produced, right? Whether that was a good city for selling stuff, there's like a lot of good vendors there. Plots become a premium, and it's just like, well, there's a player leaving the game, and his land's going to go up for sale. So it's just like, who's got the if you got coin, I've got land, and it's like that kind of stuff in these digital worlds becomes increasingly interesting too. And that kind of stuff kind of gets lost in time, especially when, a game quote unquote dies, which is why I feel like it's so important to preserve these things.
Well, that, and it's like a game goes down and you and your community have put like hundreds of bajillions of hours.
Okay. So,
and that's just gone.
So to that end, I'm going to reference Star Wars Galaxies again, because when they went from the combat upgrade to the new game enhancement, or NGE, it fundamentally changed the game overnight very, very drastically. And a lot of people felt like their hard work and their effort that they put into crafting this character and crafting this world that they lived in, because that was the whole tagline: experience the greatest adventure yours, right? Like that was the whole thing about Star Wars Galaxies. It wasn't like you were following Kyle Katarn or a Dash Rendar or a Princess Leia or something like that. It was you. It was all about your story, your adventure, your whatever, and all that put into it got destroyed overnight, seemingly, by changing fundamentally how the game is played. Now, in time, I do believe that NGE got good, but it took them several years, and by the time I feel like it really reached its peak, the damage was already done, and they SOE was going under, and along with all the other MMOs. I mean, hell, like there's a whole slew of MMOs that we'll just never see again. Like Matrix Online. I'm not saying it was good. I'm just saying it existed. The Matrix Online as an example, and I remember like kind of like the big deal about that. Like
oh yeah,
the different things that you could do in that game.
So a thing about that though is, like the old MMOs that went away and Sony, right? So Daybreak purchased, I guess, like the right to run all a bunch of the Sony stuff, right? And Sony used to have, I forget what that was called. It was like some kind of a Game Pass where it's just like I can play all the Sony things.
They did.
And there was some interesting stuff that was in there, but it was like Planetside and Tannerus. Do you remember Tannerus, the hover tank game? Yeah, you and me were the only ones. So, but there was all these games that were on the SOE service, right? And then Daybreak acquired basically the service, but they didn't get Galaxies, which was the interesting thing. And I guess it's because of the license.
Well, I think the licensing was an issue, because at the time when Galaxies, and a lot of people don't realize this, is when Galaxies was going under was when SWTOR was getting ready to come out.
SWTOR.
But get swole and Tor. But well, I mean, because you can actually build like some characters that are just like big and beefy. But yeah, so like, in 2011, man, 2012, and that kind of time range is when Star Wars: The Old Republic was on its way, and Star Wars Galaxies was on its way out. And I guess the idea was they didn't want two competing MMOs at the same time for people's attention in the Star Wars landscape. So that was kind of part of it, which is why I think to this day, I feel like that's why no one's actually gone after like the Legends crew, because I mean, even though you're supposed to legally own your own copy of the game, because they're not running quote unquote not running server code, but I think because they don't have any precedence for running Star Wars Galaxies on their own end, because it would be a conflict of interest to the Old Republic. So I feel like that's part of the reason why Galaxies gets a pass in a lot of ways.
Well, another reason it gets a pass is because if you talk about it, then you legitimize it. So, they can't, it's like, don't mention it, and then people won't find out that it's there.
Right. Even though it's been kind of growing year over year, I think they're celebrating 5 years now, and they're getting ready to launch a big expansion, like a community made expansion for Star Wars Galaxies. They're adding for the Legends server. I want to be specific about that because there's a couple of other smaller communities, but for the Legends community, they have on a regular basis like 1,500 people playing on their server. And for an emulated community, that's not a small number. And they're launching an expansion that's going to add in Cloud City as a playable, like, quote unquote, planet, right? It's a playable place that they can go to. It's going to have its own space element too. So like all the planets in the game have like a space element. So like you can fly around Tatooine out in outer space, or Endor and stuff like that. So they're adding in like a sky version, like a city in the clouds kind of like player like fighting area that they're going to have in there, Plus, there's going to be like player-owned housing on Cloud City that you can get, and there's a whole like quest line series that they're putting out there, and there's all new like clothing and stuff like that. And it's really impressive that a whole community has come around this, that they've not only revived it for people who missed it and loved the game so much, but they're also continuing to add in content and keep it fresh and keep it new. So it's not just like, here's your nostalgia cake, have fun, we're not doing anything with it. They're like, here's your nostalgia cake, and then we're going to give you something a little nutritious too. We're going to give you something new. I think that's awesome. So yeah,
and City of Heroes also made quite the comeback as an emulator project, right? And you saw like how much caution was taken with that, because it's just like, we don't want to kick the hornet nest and get the
well, there's like so that one was a little interesting too, right? So there was a lot of drama around that, because there, as always with any emulator project, any game that has an emulator for it, there's drama in the community because somebody has an ego the size of like the sun, and or multiple people have egos the size of the sun, and someone ultimately wants to be in charge and make the calls and make the decisions, and nobody can be like, look, we all want this, let's work together. So there's a lot of drama that ends up happening with these. Like Legends is also not immune to this. Like back before Legends finally got its foot in the door, they almost lost it. So like they had somebody that was part of their development team years ago that almost like destroyed everything, but thankfully because they got some stick up their butt. But somebody was able to recover everything, and they were able to like resecure the project, and they figured out how to do the project properly, and they got it back up and running again. And now it's been the longest running like NGE version of the game ever, more than any other community, and it's pretty good. I mean, there's also a vanilla version of the game from launch called what's the name of it's just SWG Emu, I think is what it is, and they have their Basilisk server that's pretty popular. And because they're literally two different games. I mean, it's the same kind of like thing, but like the way you play the games is vastly different in both of them. And I think it's awesome that they both exist, because they're both trying to be purists, to the fullest extent. So one's a purist in the vanilla sense, the other one's a purist in the NGE sense. But the NGE guys are also adding in new content to it, while also staying true to the core of what that game was. So they're not changing a whole bunch of fundamental like gameplay mechanics. In other words, like they're trying to be pure to what it was, while also adding in new content. I think that's great. I'm glad that these communities exist, because it goes to show you that there was still a huge love for this game. And if it wasn't for, them getting shut down, there'd probably still be a whole lot of people playing it on live today if they were still around.
I think maybe people even appreciate it more because they had a close brush with death.
There's that too. But I mean, it kind of goes back to, previous conversations we've had about, accessibility to games, like people who are struggling, or maybe they have PTSD or something like that, and they find some kind of like a love for a game, something like an MMO that is very persistent, that people spend and invest a lot of time in. There's some kind of like comfort there for that person. And, when something like that gets yanked away from you, when you've built up and you've made all of these friends, it can cause a void, and it can be, and I mean, everybody's different, like I'm not going to sit here and make fun of somebody who has depression over a video game, but that kind of stuff does exist, and it can be very challenging for folks at times who are trying.
Well, because it's not just a game, it's your community, your friends.
Right. It's their touchstone. It's their cornerstone. It's like, it's kind of like, it's what can help people come from that dark place. And
well, it's like you come home and your town's gone. What? Like in real life, it's like, oh, I pull into my driveway and then I realize like I'm the only house in the town now. Like, what happened? It's very disturbing.
You know, and that can be harsh for some people, and then you got to and I know that these developers aren't doing these things because they want to be mean, but like, at the same time, it just, I'm really glad that these communities exist to try and bring these things back. Not to turn this like conversation kind of into like a real mopey thing, but why I think it's so important.
It's like business reality problems on both ends, right? Like if you have an IP and you don't defend it, then that creates legal standing that it weakens your IP. So you have to defend it if you're aware that anything's going on. But you can pretend that you're not aware until it becomes too public, and then it's like, well, now we gotta. Which is why this stuff stays down low a lot.
Right. Let me keep on this Galaxies thing just for a little bit longer and tell you about Star Wars Galaxy's Source. And Source is a community that is very much closely tied to Legends. And the objective of the Source community is to continue to work on the code to get the game up to where it was when it was at the final day. So what the communities have now does not have all the content or features that were available at the end of the life cycle of Star Wars Galaxies. So they're continuing to work on unlocking those abilities. For example, they've got space flight, but one of the things you could do at the end of cycle with Galaxies was you could actually fly your ship in atmosphere. So like they actually added that ability to be able to fly from surface to space and vice versa in Galaxies, which is a cool thing that they added at the end of that life cycle. But that's not currently available on any of the emulators, right? And so there's those kinds of things. But the core thing that I'm trying to get to with this is there was a developer for Source, and he was one of the lead guys, passed away last year. I think it was either last year or the year before. And the community was heartbroken, so much so that the Legends community came out in force, the Source community came out in force to honor this guy within the game and outside of the game. I mean, there was people that knew him. They were like, well, here's the live stream of his funeral if you want to go and pay your respects. Here's like a thing you can go donate to his family. Like the community of thousands of people rallied around one guy who just had a passion for keeping this game alive for people that loved it. And that to me says more about, that than, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but it says a lot to me. You know what I mean? Like the passion and the love for this kind of stuff that these communities have. It says a lot. So, well, here's where I'm going to ask you guys a question. If there was any game, it doesn't have to be an MMO or a persistent world, but if there was any game that got killed or that you can't play anymore that you wish to see return, what would it be?
Well, I would have said City of Heroes, but it's back. And shockingly, since it's back, I'm not really playing it. So I guess maybe, it's like I wish that it was back. But then when I've got it back, it's just like, well, it's back. I'll get around to it. So it's that complacency.
Yeah, I think Galaxies is probably mine. I never played much of it, but it was one of those, I'm going to get to it. And then by the time I got to it, it was gone. And I played enough to sort of get the memes and have feels for the Twilight Dancers, but that was the extent of it. I never got to the later parts of the game. So I
Nullified, what are you doing? Just in a cantina. No, don't worry about it.
It's fine. It's fine. Just don't look at the screen. Don't look at the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely.
What's Mel and Luke got in common? They both play Star Wars with one hand.
Oh Jesus! Oh. Sweet Jesus!
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a toughie, right? I mean, definitely Galaxies is one of those things where if there was an official capacity for that game to come back, I think that'd be really great. But, there's been so many games out there. Here's an odd one. I would love to see Star Trek Online come back with their like player made content again. I mean, I know the game's not dead yet, but like, that feature was freaking killed off, and I'd love to see it return because I feel like in a game like that, player made content is one of the sole reasons that can like be the lifeblood of a game. I mean, that's kind of why I feel like. Go ahead.
Did they explain sufficiently, like, why they pulled that out of Neverwinter and out of that? Was it just
because if they wanted
too much overhead?
If they wanted to keep the game afloat by adding in new content, would have broken every player-made thing out there. And so, in order to keep up with the ever-evolving thing, they had to kind of cut it out. And I think that's really unfortunate.
Where I feel like they could have aged out the player-made content and just be like, well, you guys have to make more player-made content because the assets have changed or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's the upkeep of the player-made content ability more so than upkeeping the, it's like we'd have to edit the editor and not just the game.
Yeah, I mean, so I'd like to see Earth and Beyond come back, but it would obviously need a control scheme overhaul because it was really hard on the controls. What I would also like to see come back is like a PC port of Dust 514. I think that's been like a huge failing of CCP is their inability to iterate and innovate.
Wasn't that a rumored thing that they were going to bring 514
so
to
they
PC?
weren't going to bring 514 to PC, but they were working on a new project that was going to be a new first-person shooter for the PC.
Uh-huh.
So to kind of piggyback on a story from a previous episode, like with StarCraft Ghost, Dust 514 was CCP's attempt to get into the console market, and they were working with either Microsoft or Sony to try and figure it out. Microsoft said yes, but you can't connect your game to your services. It has to be through Xbox services, and it can only be on our ecosystem. So that was an immediate nope for them. So they went with the PlayStation 3 because Sony said, yeah, we would love to have you here, and we don't, anything to get you on board, because blah, blah, blah. So they went with the PlayStation 3, which was not a hotly known system for first-person shooters. It's not that the PlayStation 3 had bad games, it just wasn't like usually the system that you would go to for a first-person shooter. And oddly enough, a game that was also supposed to be tied to their flagship game, EVE Online, it's oddly interesting that there was never a PC version of it where their audience existed. So that game did not do very well on the console, and they've had to backpedal that pretty hard and remove any of those integrated features into EVE because there used to be an integrated chat feature where you can actually in the game chat with people in Dust. But what's strange about this though is there was a new filing report that came out. My buddy Dex, who's also in the community here, sent me a thing, and I'm gonna read this to you guys. This is really interesting. CCP Games and Pearl Abyss, who owns CCP Games, who's also the developer or the publisher for Black Desert Online, we reported on Pearl Abyss fourth quarter revenues earlier this week, noting that the company's operating revenue was down, partly due to dips in revenue from Black Desert Mobile and EVE Online. Pointing out that these figures actually portend much more to CCP Games than we initially thought, and that's because Pearl Abyss purchased CCP Games conditionally. The additional $200 million on top of the base $225 million would be paid out only on the condition of CCP's performance, and CCP did not deliver. It wasn't so much that EVE Online dropped the ball, it was that CCP released only one of the multiple games in its pipeline over the last few years. And Pearl Abyss would have been counting on several others that didn't make it to market, including Project Nova, which was supposed to be that first-person shooter. All of this is to say that by the nosy gamers' reckoning, and we concur, Pearl Abyss got CCP for a song. But what Pearl Abyss and now the grumpy investors really wanted was a big release in 2020 to tide it over until Crimson Desert, which is another Pearl Abyss game that's going to be coming out, I think, either this year or next year. So that's to say that CCP's been having a hard time trying to keep their stuff afloat because every time they start a project, they're notorious for canceling it. Just notorious.
Yeah, like, do you want to go to work for them as a developer? And hey, we're going to hire for a new project. Nah.
Well, I mean, so they've come out with their Gunjack and Gunjack 2, which is like their VR like shooter game, right? Which is kind of silly. They went on this They went on this VR stint, and they did the Eve Valkyrie, which when they attached the non VR version of it, a lot more people were able to play the game. But then they just killed development of that game. Period. They shelved anything to do with VR because they're like, it's just not at a viable state. Meanwhile, there's things going on with VR out the wazoo all over the place, and it's a surprise to me that they decided to shelve all of that because, anyway, like they're not able to really produce anything. They finally came out with an EVE Online mobile game, which in and of itself is clever and fun for what it is. But it still feels weird to me that they've had all of these other projects that they've come out with that they've just canned left and right. They were going to be doing a vampire MMO off of what was the IP of that? God,
the White Wolf stuff.
I don't remember specifically what it was, but they got all this tech. And they were going to include part of that same tech in EVE Online for the walking in stations stuff that was supposed to come out in Karna years ago. And they even did the whole like drawing boards, and they showed all this concept art and stuff like that for walking in stations, and like people would be able to own bars and shops, and you actually have like corp offices and all these like physical things that you could do. And it was going to open up a whole new market of gameplay for people who weren't into the ship side of things to be able to do like the walking around stuff like a traditional MMO. But yet people were ringing so hard about that they decided to go ahead and can it because they were like, you guys aren't focusing on the internet spaceships. You've got so many problems with balance in your spaceship side of thing. Why are you even trying to do this? So they got so much negative backlash over it for whatever reason that they canned it. And then they even sold off all of the assets to this other MMO that they were working on, and they completely scrapped it. And then they have since removed any element of the first person, like walking in station stuff from the game. It doesn't even exist anymore. Because you used to be able to go into like your captain's quarters or whatever. Like that's all been removed from the game.
Yeah. See, if I was the PR side with these guys, I would say make a like a child company and put all the stuff of all the other projects that you're going to develop like under that name, so that whenever you talk about your stuff, then you're just talking about Eve, so that people don't say, oh, well, you because the assumption is like, well, the developers that should be working on Eve are working on this other BS. Not really, because we hired other people to do the other thing, right? So
yeah,
just put the line there so people understand, like, no, that's a whole different building and a different. Right.
And for what it's worth, I have a huge love-hate relationship for EVE Online in general. Like I've been playing that thing since 2008, and you know, and for what it is, I've enjoyed it. But like, I definitely feel like the writing's on the wall over the next few years. I really, I hate to say it, but there is a good chance that, you know, at some point, I feel like it's got much fewer days in front of it than it does behind it.
They're one solid competitor away from instant collapse.
I really do think so, and I think what would probably potentially happen is the PC version would die, and they would just keep the mobile one going.
Yeah, because you guys got phones, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean it's more accessible. Well, it's more accessible internationally, right? Like they can get more accessibility in there and keep that kind of afloat. And it's a shame, really. It really is. So.
Yeah, so other game that has really pissed people off lately is Archeage Online, because they had Archeage, and then people were like, well, the pay to win is ridiculous because it's a game about like running a business in an MMO and land barony, and you know, like, can I outproduce the other players who are producing whatever in the economy? So then they came out with another version of the game that was $30 to buy, but they took the cash shop item out, right? So it's like, okay, now we're going to start new servers, and everybody can make the initial land grab, like buy the game on day one, run in there, buy your claim, right? And it's like a reboot, so it's a level playing field again. And then now they've announced, oh, we're going to, because low population, we're going to consolidate worlds in that. But they're not going to wipe the one that they're consolidating into. So now all these people that are on the servers that got picked to be taken down are just homeless. And the land is already claimed, like all the prime stuff is already in place. And those people have progress where they're going to come in like new players into the thing. So now there's a second riot with that. And it's just like that company just can't get their shit straight. It's yeah.
Well, another MMO that I think is a fascinating like observation, and there's a few. I made mention of Second Life earlier, but in Tropia Universe,
the real cash economy.
Yeah, and
it scares the shit out of me.
And I just pulled up on Twitch, and there's 6 people streaming this game right now, and one person's got 49 viewers. So I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's definitely not commonly talked about.
No, because the game itself, if not only is it actively, aggressively ugly, but it's also so super grind, right? There was like the guy, he put a video up where he like looted a thing that was worth like $10,000 or something. But the backstory is, I had to spend like 50 days grinding, murdering this one mob until it dropped the thing that was worth the money. And it potentially never would have dropped it, so he actually got lucky after over a month of just complete brain dead gameplay. So that doesn't appeal to me, but cool that it's real money though, I guess. So yeah.
I mean, there's people who've cashed out, like they've gotten like that one random loot dropper was like, that's worth $9,000. It's just like, holy crap.
Yeah, and they use that as their poster child thing for like this is the loss leader that we bait people in here with, is you too could get rich.
Yeah, but I mean it's a fascinating thing to explore. I mean, I definitely love just because I love to torture myself, so I love to go explore these just really strange games. But I mean it's been around for long enough to make me wonder, like, why isn't it on Steam? Like. I mean, I know not
split.
Well, I mean, there's that, but it does make me wonder though. Like, I wonder if there's any other games, MMOs that are on Steam that use Steam's backend for its MMO. Like, I mean, because I found that so fascinating that I was able to just connect in, just like launch Shadowbane and just make a character and play. There was no create an account. There was nothing of that nature. So,
yeah, my worry with the Shadowbane thing is, okay, so there's no monthly sub, right? And then they're going to make the money that they make, because I feel like anybody that's going to buy Shadowbane already bought it in the first week. So that's their sales curve, right? So how long does that game actually stay up? Because that money that from the initial sales, which will probably be the peak of sales.
I mean, I don't know.
It.
Like they could go the RuneScape route. I mean, RuneScape's already got a player base, right? So old school RuneScape already has a player base, and it's not gone anywhere. But they've recently put old school RuneScape on Steam, and they like front paged the crap out of that. So I mean, there's a potential there to gain even more new players. I mean, think about like all of the people who've never heard of this game, who now all of a sudden see it in their face and they're like, well, let's go try out this retro looking bizarre game. I mean, the same thing could be said about Shadowbane. I mean, think about what if they were to get some kind of like, they pay some kind of money and get Shadowbane put on the front page for everybody to like take a look at, and it's just like, well, what is this? But it didn't take me long to find it. Like, it was like on the first or second page of like the MMOs. I feel like it was even on the first page of the MMOs when I was like looking for stuff. I was like, what? I was shocked. I was like, what in the hell?
Yeah, it's just, I just wonder about longevity of the product, because it's once done, it's like there's no more profit stream.
Yeah, and nothing in their cash shop screamed to me like massive pay to win either, which I thought was interesting. So yeah, here it is on the first page I'm scrolling through, Shadowbane right there. That's nuts. Mollified, you've been oddly quiet. What's on your mind?
Well, I just, it's hard because I have dabbled in a lot of MMOs, but I've never been this super deep player of them. For me, I like the variety that gaming has, and so I tend not to stick with any one game. Another way to say it is I have a short attention span, I suppose.
And that's fair, because I'm kind of the same way, right? Like, as much as I loved Galaxies back in the day, like I have way too many other games that I've enjoyed playing. And I get into a kick with or a run on, and I go with it. I think another interesting game that I would love to see come back, even though they've already come out with newer versions or whatever, and Jim's gonna laugh at me again, is America's Army 2.0 or 2.5 or whatever it was that they did. They've come out with two other America's Army games since then. Like one's like Training Ground, and the other one's like America's Army 3 or something. And neither of those were ever remotely interesting to me in the way that they did their game. I always felt that the America's Army 2.0 was the better experience. It was a tactical based shooter, very much in line with working with a team of people to accomplish your objectives. It had a lot of realism to it, where you had to be very specific. Like your gun could get jammed, and you'd have to unjam your gun. Multiple ways to like throw a grenade to get into the right spot, whether you like underhand it, roll it, throw it over something. They had a lot of that stuff. I mean, I know there's games today that have these mechanics to them now, but I feel like America's Army definitely pioneered some stuff, or at least reinvented the wheel in a lot of ways. I also liked too that each round, there was no respawn, so like each round it was like one of those things where you had to be very specific about the decisions that you made, because if you got then you had to wait it out until the next round started, which made it interesting because you could win a match by elimination or by accomplishing your objectives. It's always fun too, like if you're trying to hunt, like let's say your objective is to defend, and you got a team of guys sneaking around trying to do stuff. It's always funny when you feel like you've killed everybody on their team but like one guy, and he's been sneaking around somewhere and you can't find him because he's like on the other side of the map, or he's like hiding in a tunnel like trying to get the last objective done. And those kinds of things are always fun to me. So like that's another game that I wish could come back. I know not necessarily a persistent game, but it's definitely one that I've loved of Days Gone. So
I can't think of too many other games that really drew me in. I do think that the Elder Scrolls Online has done a pretty good job of creating a world, but it is one of the MMOs that I think you could play entirely solo and ignore all of the MMO style content, which kind of defeats the purpose.
Wasn't there another MMO? What am I thinking of? Is it WildStar? Does that exist anymore?
Yeah, it's dead.
Yeah, that one's gone.
Yeah, I feel like that one's gone. So there was that Guild Wars. I loved the original Guild Wars, and that still exists. Guild Wars 2 still exists.
What was that shooter MMO thing that came out? Like it was right at the same time as Overwatch, and then just instantly died. Yeah, Battleborn. Boy,
God,
that thing.
Screw that game, dude. You and I refunded that game so hard. Like Jim and I remember when Jim and I got Battleborn, we're like, let's check this out. We noped out of that really hard.
Yeah, it was immediately apparent that was a inferior product, and
I'm no fan of Overwatch either. I mean, I've got nothing against it. It's just I'm not a MOBA or a first person, third person MOBA like fan. And I think maybe that's partially why I also have a lot of hard times dealing with Squadrons. Although Squadrons, adding in the ability to customize my multiplayer a bit more has helped with that.
To me, it's just the repetitive, same old thing.
Yeah, it's extremely repetitive. Not a lot of room for iteration. There you go. There's a lot out there. I mean, there's a lot to appreciate about these games, even though they may not be around anymore. I'm sure there are those that are keeping them alive in some form or fashion, with niche communities out there. So that's always something to appreciate, at least. But
yeah, well, we were talking about Second Life, right? So a lot of Second Life competitors happened. There was one called There. There's maybe like 5 other ones that I can't remember the names of, but it's just like you heard about them and they looked way good, and then just not a word. They didn't get the kind of press attention.
Yeah, it's really strange when you see like a game that was like hyped up, and all of a sudden overnight, just it's gone, just like whatever happened to that, and like no one talks about it.
Yeah, and I wonder also, like, if you determine, you put in the development budget, the game's done, right? And then you determine, like, the game's a fail before you even really get to commit the money that is the marketing budget, to get the game's name out there. You just realize, like, off initial numbers, like, this isn't going to catch. So I've heard that generally you have to spend like almost equivalent to the development cost as your marketing cost to actually get a game to succeed, because onboarding people is the hardest, most expensive thing. So at that point, maybe they just cut their losses. It's like, it's a done ass game, but we're not going to advertise it because that's just throwing money. Why throw good money after bad?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we're still running our giveaway here on our Discord server, 100 for 100. In other words, if we get 100 members in our community, we'll do a $25 gift card for 4 weeks. We'll do a giveaway every week for 4 weeks. So that's pretty exciting. We also have, for the members that we currently have, which they seem to be going up every day. We get another couple of users here and there. There's a lot of conversations that are going on, a lot of really cool and unique people. Unfortunately, as I'm doing this outro here, I'm getting notifications from Malify that he's had some computer issues. So it's a good opportunity for us to wrap this up. But we really appreciate you guys listening, and this is going to be the last one for several weeks. But yeah, tell your friends about our Discord server. If you also go to just OtherWorlds.gg's website, you'll see a link tree full of links to where you can find the podcast on other platforms. You can even find links to our Discord server. You can find links to our Steam group and some of our social media stuff. So if you just go to OtherWorlds.gg, you'll get a full list of where you can find us on all of the things and more. We really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you when we return. Thanks for listening. This has been episode number 13.